Hello, welcome to the Deep 404. There has not been a great deal of news from the Ukrainian front line in the last 24 hours. Things seem to be continuing as they have been, with strong fighting across the front, with the Russians pushing forward in a number of areas. One area of interest being Sinkovka up near Kupiansk in the sort of most northern regions of the fighting. It appears as though the Russians have been pushed back and have retreated back out of Sinkovka. Pardon me. My son has given me a mug for Christmas. I'm trying it out, and I just found out it holds 2 cans of beer. So yes, in Sinkovka, it looks like the Ukrainians are having some success in pushing the Russians back. However, the area of Sinkovka down to, from Kupiansk down to Krasny Liman, that area is an area where it seems as though the Russian tactics over the last couple of months in that area have been to implement what they call mowing the lawn, which is a push forward, applying pressure, capturing some townships, making some ground, and then reinforcing, solidifying positions behind them, locating the positions and the entry points to the township they've just taken sort of ownership of or moved into, and then pulling back and letting the Ukrainian forces come in, only to attack them with targeted locations, and this sort of going forward and then retreating back thing they're calling mowing the lawn. Now in Sinkovka, I don't know if that is what has happened here, but it does seem that in that Kupiansk to Krasny Liman area, where the Oskol River is on the west, and that's where the Russians have slowly been heading, the Russians seem to have been in a position there a number of times where they could have moved forward further, it seemed like, but it almost appears as though they're under some sort of orders to keep the line roughly where it is at this stage. I'm not saying that is the case, but that's the way it appears to be. There's been a lot of this back and forth, and there's been an increasing number of reported Ukrainian losses in the southern section down towards Krasny Liman, which gives me the impression that the Russians are doing okay in the fighting in that area and not really perhaps suffering as much as the Ukrainians are, but this mowing the lawn might be what's going on there at this stage. Anyhow, I want to talk a little bit about the recent missile strikes. And I'll just go here. We can talk about a couple of things. So the missile strikes over the last couple of weeks, Russia has in 2 days, it seems, launched almost 300 missiles. Those missiles are launched from Tu-22 bombers, Tu-95 bombers, which are the big old 4-propped things, and MiG-31 fighter bombers. The Tu-95s, I'll just actually go here. I've got some of these so you can have a look and see what I'm talking about here. The Tu-95, these ones here, these bombers, so these carry up to 8 Kh-101 missiles. Now the Kh-101 or 55, these are a subsonic cruise missile. So they, oh sorry, I didn't give you the screen I was after. There we go. Yeah, so these are the Tupolev 95s. They carry 8 Kh-101 or Kh-55 missiles. These missiles are subsonic cruise missiles. So they're not a ballistic device, which is something which is either launched from the ground and just follows a ballistic path, that is, gravity defines where it goes, or dropped and follow a ballistic path where gravity defines where they go again. These are cruise missiles. They're capable of manageable, maneuverable flight. They can fly at low levels, they can adjust their heights, they can move around. But in terms of Russian cruise missile capability, the Kh-101s are of the slower variety, about Mach 0.7, so they're subsonic. The other aircraft that are involved in this are the Tu-22M3s. These are a more modern aircraft. The NATO refer to these as the Backfire. They call the Tu-95s the BEARs. The BEARs came into first flight was in 1952, and the Russians have about 40 or 50 of those big 4-engine BEAR bombers in service. Each of them can carry 8 of those KH-101s. The Backfire here, the Tu-22s, the first flight was in 1969. So it's a more modern aircraft by 18 years or so. And 60 or 70 of these are in service at the moment in the United States. They can carry something like 18 Fab 500 bombs, 3 of the KH-22s/32s, which I'll come to in a moment, or 4 KH-47s, which are the Kinzhal missiles. And then the last one involved in the fighting here is the MiG-31. The MiG-31 came in, first flight is 1975, so the most modern of the 3. There are reportedly about 130 of these in service in the Russian Air Force. They carry 4 R-37 Vimpel or axe-head air-to-air missiles with about a 400-kilometre range. These missiles, these R-37s, are the ones that make it unlikely that the F-16s will come to Ukraine, because a number of Russian jets can carry the R-37s, and those R-37s and the jets have a much longer range and ability to detect the F-16s. So the Russian jets will detect the F-16 and fire one of these missiles at it before the F-16 can detect the Russian jet. Anyhow, it's a different topic. But MiG-31s, known as the Foxhound, they can travel at Mach 2.8 themselves. They have about a 3 to 5,000 kilometre range, depending on what version they are and what they're doing. And they can carry 1 Kinzhal, 1 KH-47. Now, the big BEAR, just going back to it for a second, much slower, big heavy bomber, can travel at 925 kilometres per hour, so subsonic, and it's got a 13,000 kilometre range, so it can travel a long way. The Tu-22, they can travel, they're sort of jet modern or more modern jet. They can travel at Mach 1.8, so they're quick for a bomber, and a 6.8 thousand kilometre range on them. Now, of these different missiles here, I just want to read a little bit about this, and this is from an article in the Eurasian Times by Vijender K. Thakur, who's a retired IAF Indian Air Force's Jaguar pilot. I just want to read a little bit about what he says about some of this. The missile engagement challenges. Both the KH-32, 22 or 32, which is fired from the Tupolev 22s, and the Kinzhal, present themselves as aerodynamic targets. So they don't come in as ballistic targets. They are aerodynamic, dynamic in the air. They can move around. Their approach speed and height at which they transit is well above the engagement envelopes of NATO air defence systems deployed in Ukraine, including the US Patriot systems. Now, the Patriot systems have been operational in Ukraine for a number of months now, and some months ago we had the first reports of one being destroyed or damaged, reportedly by a Kinzhal. There was footage that came out about that, and the Pentagon confirmed afterwards that it had been damaged. Now, with a Patriot air defence system, like a number of air defence systems, they're comprised of a number of components. It's not just the missiles sitting there. You have trucks carrying missiles. You then have a command unit, which is a separate truck at a distance away, which commands operations. And then you have radar units, which are there for tracking of targets. And then you will probably have some sort of just a truck with big generators and fuel on the back of it to provide power to all of those systems. So it's a set of components that form the air defense system. Now, out of those, the most valuable one of them is the radar unit. If you destroy the missile carriers and the missiles, well, that's great, but it's relatively easy to get another set of missiles into one of the other carrier units and just get some missiles out of the stockpile. Not that that's particularly easy in this conflict, but easier perhaps than replacing a radar unit, a complex radar unit which needs to be developed. They're not just sitting around where there are excess missiles sitting around. So that's perhaps the most valuable component in the air defense system of a Patriot-like system. The Pentagon, in this instance a few months ago, did confirm that damage was done to the Patriot system. The Russians claimed it was destroyed. What we don't know is what damage was done and what the damage was done to. If the damage was done to the command truck, probably, difficult, but relatively easy to get another command truck going, depending what the damage was. If it was to a missile launch unit, not a problem. You might even be able to save some of the missiles off it perhaps and reuse them on another missile launch unit. And you've still got other missile launch units, so you're still operational. But if the radar was damaged, then the system is out of operation until that radar unit is replaced, because it just can't track and do anything there. So this author is suggesting that the KH-32 and the KH-47, the Kinzhals, operate outside the engagement envelopes of NATO air defense systems, and including US Patriot systems. Now, Ukraine isn't operating the most modern Soviet air defense systems. Of the ones that they are, like the S-3, they may have some S-300s remaining and some books. They will no doubt be running low on missile stocks for them as well, and they're not getting any resupplies from Russia, of course. Going back to this article. Oh, yes. So, in the recent strikes that have happened over Ukraine, there were reports a couple of days ago, of between 8 and a dozen Kinzhal missiles being used. These, Ukraine reported that they'd shot down most of them. Now, any reports of Kinzhal missiles being shot down needs to be taken with a large amount of skepticism. The Kinzhal missile, the KH-47, is a hypersonic speed missile. The KH-32s can travel at Mach 4.6 or 4.7, so they are very difficult to intercept. They're very fast and they're maneuverable. The Kinzhal is a step above that again. At Mach 10 or more, the ability for these air defense systems to target it and then to get a missile off at it is very, very slim. So it's not to say it couldn't happen. I mean, it could happen that you have a Patriot system detect one coming in and then launch 2 or 3 missiles at it, and one of them perhaps gets lucky and strikes it. I guess that's, in theory, that's possible, but the likelihood of it is very low that would happen. One of the interesting points, which this author goes on to note, about the KH-32 is the KH-32 missile, he says, is claimed to be completely invulnerable to enemy interceptors and air defense systems. So not only because of its speed and maneuverability, but because it can withstand hits from a 20mm rotary cannon or air-to-air missiles. So in this case, you've got a KH-32 travelling at Mach 4.6. You manage to get a shot off at it, an air defense, or an air-to-air missile from a plane. It gets to it, it explodes, and it doesn't damage the missile enough to stop it from continuing on its approach. Ukrainian air defense spokespeople have mentioned how they are required to fire 2 or sometimes 3 air defense missiles in an attempt to intercept a Russian incoming missile. So if you are trying to hit a KH-32 traveling at Mach 4.6, you've probably got very little opportunity to get a shot in. You might get one in, you might get two in. And if you do and they explode and they don't destroy the unit, you've just wasted two very expensive air defense missiles, and that incoming missile is still hitting its target. Other features of the KH-32 is its reported ability to exchange target information with other KH-32s. So, according to Russian media, this ability was incorporated in order to outwit adversary air defense when attacking a carrier battle group. So a carrier battle group, in this case, what these have been designed for is to attack American aircraft carrier groups. So he says, while attacking a carrier battle group, only one missile switches on its radar seeker to precisely locate the aircraft carrier. Other missiles in the attack package, which may be coming from different directions, remain dark by keeping their seekers off. If the missile with the active seeker is shot down, another missile in the package can take over the role. In the Ukrainian context, he says, operating in pairs, one missile fitted with radar emission sensors could act as a decoy. It would present itself as a target just to pinpoint the location of the air defense radar. Having pinpointed an air defense radar, it could relay the coordinates to the other missile of the pair, which would then dive down almost vertically from very high altitudes and destroy the air defense radar. So, as we know, with a lot of air defense systems, and not just air defense systems, a lot of systems, like even tanks, even the Israeli tanks with the trophy tank protection system on them, still susceptible to a hit from the top. They look around, they're a radar system, they look around, they don't look down. Same with most radars, they don't give you a full 360 degree and total, 180 degree across the top. So in this case, they're talking about two of these KH-32 missiles going out, one high, one low, the low one seeking, looking for air defense, hoping that an air defense will turn its tracking on and will indicate where it is. Now, that first one is sending the location of the detected air defense system to the one above, and then I suppose they both have a go at it. And if one of them gets it, great. If the first one doesn't get it and the second one then comes in from a completely different and unexpected angle and operating in this dark mode without its seeker on, perhaps unknown or undetected to the air defense system until it's coming down at such a speed directly above it that it can't be stopped. The other thing that the KH-32s can reportedly do is that they can be retargeted. So if one has been sent towards a target, this can be done by the weapons controller within the Tupolev-22 bomber who has fired these missiles. What they can do is, based upon information they have, remembering that these missiles have a range of 1,000 kilometers or more, so they can spend some time in the air in a loitering mode, if you will, maneuvering around, waiting for a command, or they can be targeted at something and then retargeted. So if while they are in the air after they've been launched, a more valuable target has been identified, they can be retargeted to go and then attack that. So these missiles are very capable. These aren't just simple dumb sort of missiles. These are things which are now capable of acting in pairs or groups together, operating in stealthier modes where only one of them will activate their radar seeking capabilities, then for making themselves a target. The others are able to receive positional information from that one that is actively seeking. If that active seeker is destroyed, they can hand off and another one can begin the active seeking. So very difficult to address and to stop, particularly when you consider that they're traveling at the speeds that they're traveling at this speed of Mach 4.6. And then you consider the Kinzhals, who are traveling at 2.5 times that speed, at Mach 10 or more. The pure ability to detect them in any time and then to be able to launch a missile towards it is just extremely unlikely. And in an article I was reading today from Western media, they were talking about how the Western military world is waking up to this now, that they just don't have air defense systems capable of dealing with the Russian missiles at this stage. And reportedly, the Russian S-400 missile system is superior to the even the Patriot system. This is because of the different ideologies of war over the last few decades, where the US has moved to assuming air superiority. So F-22s, F-35s, massive aircraft carriers, wherever they go, they can have air superiority, air dominance over the battlefield. Whereas the Russians have not tried to beat the West and the United States in that area, and have instead focused on air defense. And so the air defense capabilities of Russia seems to be world leading at this stage, which means in this conflict in Ukraine, where Ukraine does not have air superiority, the Russian air defense system, combined then with Russian aircraft who can fly, because they're not being taken out by superior US air forces, the Russian missiles are able then to get in and overwhelm the air defense systems of Ukraine. And it does seem as though air defense is one of the prime targets over the last week of activity. All the reports from both Russian and from Ukrainian sources are that the Russian missile strikes have been aimed at repair facilities and facilities where you might put components together. So where you might put together UAVs, or where you might do repairs on damaged tanks or damaged artillery and things like that. So the Russians have been destroying those facilities, which means the Ukrainians are then not able to repair their equipment and replace equipment at the front line. And for example, you've got a piece of artillery which has fired enough shells that the barrel is starting to warp and become inaccurate. It needs to go back and be replaced or be rebored or whatever, so it can be reused. These type of things are becoming more and more difficult for Ukraine to do, as the Russians seem to be targeting those types of facilities. But perhaps even more so than that, it seems as though the Russians are targeting Ukrainian air defense. Now, by targeting Ukrainian air defense, particularly around Kyiv, where a lot of the strikes in the last week have happened, and we know that these strikes have happened in Kyiv in the last week because there has been some video footage come out about that. Now, a lot of people, not a lot of people, a number of people that I've read on social media, Twitter, Telegram, will claim that if the Russian missile strikes and drone strikes were being successful, that there would be heaps of footage of all the destruction of the military sites. However, we know that the Russian military service, the Ukrainian military service, the SBU, has been cracking down on anyone that tries to release video footage of air defense in Kyiv or other Ukrainian areas operating or being destroyed. And you can completely understand this. There was footage that came out about the first Patriot system that was damaged or destroyed. Now, at that time and subsequent to that, there have been a number of reports of Ukrainian civilians being imprisoned because they have uploaded to social media footage relating to Ukrainian air defense, either operating or not operating in an area. Now, as you can imagine, you don't want your enemy knowing where your air defense system is, or what its capability is, or if it is operating at all, or if it has been destroyed. So if you have someone releasing video footage of an air defense system operating or being attacked, it's very easy for people to geolocate where you are based upon the buildings in the background, or any towers or mountains or whatever it might be, even from sounds. This means that you've suddenly given that information to your enemy. Your enemy now knows, oh, okay, we know where you've got an air defense system. Oh, we can see that one of our strikes landed nearby. Okay, we'll readjust. Oh, we could see we destroyed it entirely. We can forget about that. Or, oh, we didn't know that's where it was. Great, now we will target it. So, yeah, complete understanding as to why there is suppression of that sort of media coming out. Having said that, over the last week, there have been a number of videos coming out and a number of reports from Ukrainian Telegram channels talking about things which seem to indicate real challenges for the Ukrainian air defence. And some of the things that have been said that have given this indication is reports of Geranium-2 drones and cruise missiles flying routes all around Ukraine before hitting their target and not encountering air defence. So there are some interesting numbers here. The Ukrainian channel has reported that Ukrainian air defence spokespeople have been saying that in the last 2 weeks, Ukrainian air defence has fired 200 missiles, 200 air defence missiles, 2 to 3 missiles fired per intercept, and that's cost $500 million US. So it's $500 million spent in 2 weeks, 200 missiles. And the reason they've suggested they've had to fire so many is because in some cases they need to fire 2 or 3 in order to be able to increase the chances of striking the incoming Russian missile. Now, I just want to talk a bit about those planes that those planes that have been involved in launching these. There's the Tu-22, which is the Backfire, as NATO calls it. The Tu-95, the BEAR, this big 4-engine bomber. Now, the BEAR can carry 8 KH-101s, as opposed to the Tu-22. It can carry 18 Fab 500s, 3 KH-22s or 4 Kinzhals, and then the MiG-31 here. The MiG-31, it can carry 4 R-37 Vimpel or Axe-head air-to-air missiles with about a 400-kilometre range. That's why I think it's unlikely the F-16s will get into this conflict, because the R-37s and the Russian jets that can carry them give them a overmatch in terms of range. The MiG-31s and Russian jets will be able to detect the F-16s before the F-16s can detect the Russian jets, and the Russian jets will be able to fire their R-37s, which have a much longer range than the F-16s will be able to. But different topic. But the MiG-31s can also carry 1 KH-47 Kinzhal. So that's what's been involved in delivering these, and they've been delivering them in big numbers. You know, there's been reports of 17 of the Tupolev 22s in the sky, and of them, there's 60 or 70 of them in service. The BEARs, the Tu-95s, there's 40 or 50 of them in service, and there's meant to be 130 MiG-31s in service. So they've been going up in waves, and at time, and it's suggested that in 2 days of the recent strikes, there may have been getting close to 300 missiles fired. There are also missiles fired from the Black Sea, from some of the Russian Navy craft in the Black Sea. So 2 days, 300 missiles. Now, this brings me to a topic here I just want to sort of just question. If the Ukrainian channel, and this channel is one which generally has good, reliable information, is saying that the Ukrainian air defense spokesperson is saying they have fired 200 missiles in the last 2 weeks, and that they sometimes require 2 to 3 missiles per intercept, while Russia has launched 300 in about 2 days. Plus, Russia has been launching multiple drones. You would think then that the Ukrainians would, to have been successful, would have had to fired 2 to 3 times or something like that 300 number. So 600 or 900 air defense missiles fired in a 2-week period. But they haven't. They're reporting they've fired 200. So this indicates to me that the Ukrainian air defense is being destroyed and whittled away, and that they are not able to intercept all of the incoming missiles. Now, there has been other Ukrainian air defense spokespeople mentioning this very fact, that they have not been able to shoot down any Kinzhals, even though there are a number of pro-Ukrainian channels on Twitter who are coming out and announcing that, yes, there was 108 missiles fired and 106 were shot down, and numbers like this which just don't stand up to any sort of scrutiny, I suppose. They just don't stand up to the physics of it. As I've said, multiple independent sources saying that even the Patriot system's just not capable of stopping Kinzhals. So yeah, it looks like the Ukrainian air defense capability is suffering already, and it is likely to continue suffering if Russia continues to target it in these missile strikes. Now, I did see today that some notes about a German defense package which is going to be given to Ukraine. Very little in terms of offensive equipment, like no tanks, no armoured fighting vehicles, no artillery pieces. Ammunition, there was some 155mm ammunition, about 9,000 shells in there. I think it was 9,000. And a number of air defence systems was in there. So it seems as though Ukraine and its supporting partners are recognising that Ukraine's not going on the offensive anymore. They're going into a defensive role, and so they need air defence systems now to try to protect them through the remainder of the winter, and particularly protect Kyiv. Because if Kyiv, which is where a number of these videos surface showing some massive missile impacts, if Ukrainian President Zelensky can no longer support and protect Kyiv, of all places, that's where public opinion will start to turn against him the most and really force him into a position which he may not wish to be in, where the public tide of opinion is turning against him. Now, he's already facing some challenges, reportedly, for his presidency from people like General Zaluzhny, who reportedly has very good support from the Ukrainian armed forces. There were reports from a few weeks ago that President Zelensky had sent his aides to say to General Zaluzhny that Zelensky was not happy with him and that he should resign. Zaluzhny reportedly said, "Nope, I've done a good job. I'm not resigning. If you want to get rid of me, you fire me." Now, this is interesting. It's in defiance of his commanding order and of the president. And subsequently, he wasn't fired. And this is reportedly because President Zelensky believes that the support for Zaluzhny is so strong that if Zelensky were to fire him, the likelihood of a military coup is high, in that Zaluzhny might say, military, we're going to overthrow this guy. So there's that threat. There's also the threat, of course, of, it seems, Kyrylo Budanov, the head of the Ukrainian SBU, reports that he may also be someone who could go after the presidency. But then someone perhaps more likely an outsider to some extent, former Ukrainian Prime Minister Yulia Tymoshenko. She's made some announcements in this week indicating that she might be prepared to play that role and be better positioned to work with the US and work with Russia and bring the conflict to some sort of an end. So with all of those possible, and they're not all of them, but with those possible challenges for his presidency, the inability to protect Kyiv from Russian missile strikes and ultimately drone strikes will lead to that increased public pressure for him to be ousted. So things not looking great there for President Zelensky at the moment. Now, the other thing that is of interest here that I just want to talk about, it's the Enerhodar nuclear power plant. Oops, sorry, I thought I'd put the map on for you. There we go. The Enerhodar. So this is, I'll just zoom out. So this is Ukraine. This is the Zaporozhye region in this green area here, and Zaporozhye down here and coming down to Kherson. This body of water here is no longer water. This is the Kharkov dam or reservoir. The bridge was destroyed a few months ago, and this is now drained. So this is interesting. I was looking at a map earlier this week, which I don't think is this one. No, it's not. I don't think I have it here at the moment. I was looking at a map which was just showing the location of Ukrainian and Russian brigades across the front line. Now you see where I've got my little markers here. Imagine the number of all these markers multiplied by about 3 or 4 all along this area and drifting out behind on this side and behind on the Russian side. And it gives you an idea of how there's just so much troop activity around there. But in this area, from the reservoir down to Kherson, this area is sparse. It is blank. Like, this area is wide open to attack, and it's an area here where I think that the Ukrainians are likely to be weak in this position. Now, what's happening here is that this area has dried out. This has all been drained now. So there's now a thin stream of a river running through here. Google doesn't update these photos recently because of the conflict in Ukraine. So it doesn't want to provide this open source information to everyone. But from the Energadar nuclear power plant across here, about 5.5 kilometres. Not a particularly long way. Now, as this is drained out and it's had the summer to dry out, and now it's got the winter to freeze. I'm not a geologist. It would be lovely to have someone to talk about what the bottom of a reservoir is like and how long it takes to dry out so that it can support heavy vehicles. Or perhaps if how deeply it needs to freeze to support heavy vehicles. But this feels to me like this area and the nuclear power plant is something that needs to be watched because, as I say, it is wide open at this stage. The Russians don't have many troops down here. The Ukrainians don't have many troops up here. As soon as this becomes passable, then this whole area is open to attack. Now, the Russians, we know, are amassing large numbers of forces. General Zaluzhny, Ukrainian General Zaluzhny, just this week has been reportedly having disagreements with the Ukrainian government, where he's been saying to them, I need people. I need people to fight this battle. Where are you going to get them? He says, it's not my job to get the people. It's my job to use the people and to fight the battles. You've got to get the people. I don't care if you go overseas and recruit people or if I get you off your bums and you come and fight at the front line, but I need people. So Ukraine is struggling to get people into its armed forces. And we know this because this is backed up also by the mobilization that Ukraine is undertaking and the fact that information has been released about who can now be considered acceptable for the Ukrainian military. And the requirements are getting lower and lower and lower. And people with sight in only one eye, people who are missing a limb, things like this. Now, okay, people with particular diseases and afflictions are now okay to join the military because Ukraine has lost so many of its military. It's struggling to get the numbers up. So while Russia is getting numbers, it's getting heaps of volunteers. This area between Kherson and Pyatikhatki in Zaporozhye becomes a real risk to the Ukrainians because what could happen is that the Russians begin to staff this with resources. The Ukrainians need to defend the whole area because they don't know where the Russians might attack. With the Ukrainian shortage of troops, that means they need to start drawing troops from other areas. And right now, doing that will weaken them in those areas, whereas the Russians are able to sort of pile in more resources. So it's possible that once this ground becomes strong enough to support tanks and heavy equipment, that one side or the other could make a break across here. And the Russians might make a break up here to flank Zaporozhye on the other side and put pressure on Zaporozhye. The Ukrainians might try to get in and gain control over Energadar, the nuclear power plant. Now, this nuclear power plant has just had a backup power line has been provisioned. Transformers have been put on for a 330 kilovolt backup power line, as all of the other ones apart from one were cut. There's a 750 kilovolt supply line operational. If it fails, there has now been put in a backup one. So this, I'm imagining, means that power coming into the plant in the case that all the reactors are shut down or need power for some reason. Now, of the reactors in the plant, and if we zoom in here, we can actually see them. So those 6 little red orange dots are the nuclear reactors there. 5 of the 6 are shut down. They're in a cold shutdown mode. One of them, reactor number 4, is in a hot shutdown mode. So it's not actively producing electricity, it's producing heat and steam. So I imagine it's producing enough electricity to keep itself going, to provide the power that the plant itself needs in this reduced operational mode, and provide power to the nearby township where the majority of the staff who would normally work at the plant would live. So to keep that operational. Now, there have been reports in the past of Ukrainian shelling of this plant since it's been under Russian control. As I say, the plant is only 5 kilometres from the Ukrainian controlled side across the reservoir, and that when I say that 5 kilometres, that's when the reservoir is full of water. Across there now, where the river bed is flowing through there, might be 100 metres or so, and the rest of it is now just drying out earth. Some of the area down towards Kherson, that way I've seen some of it now. Farmers are using it. They're growing crops on that area now. So it's beginning to support some sort of weight, but perhaps not enough for tanks yet. There have been some reports in the last couple of weeks that the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, has not been able to gain access to some areas on 3 of these reactors. Now, the Russians have been in control of this power plant since last year. The IAEA inspectors have been in here that entire time with access to the site, but there have been this occasion and another occasion a little while ago where they reported they were denied access to a couple of areas a couple of times. The areas they're trying to get to now in these 3 reactors are underneath the reactors where I believe the spent fuel rods are kept. So the Russians are citing security concerns about why they don't want the inspectors in there at this stage. The inspectors are expecting that they will get in there again soon. So who knows what the Russians are doing there? I mean, maybe they want the fuel rods for some reason. They might be exfiltrating them out back to Russia for some use. I have no idea. There was, if you remember a few months ago, President Zelensky, there was a lot of concern that there may have been a false flag activated, a false flag attempt, where Ukraine might cause a problem with this nuclear power plant, blame it on Russia, so as to draw NATO nations in because Russia had enacted a nuclear attack in Ukraine. It didn't happen, but there were claims then from President Zelensky that the roofs of the reactors were mined. Subsequent to that, the IAEA came out. The inspectors said that they had no evidence of there being any mines placed on these reactors. I would say more likely on top of some of these reactors, the Russians have some sort of detection equipment or air defense around here or something like that to protect the area. But again, something which the Russians, this site, are obviously keen to maintain in an operational state as it supplies area to this Zaporozhye region, and with the likelihood that the Russians will look to take the oblasts to the east of Zaporozhye. This map here might be a little easier. Sorry, to the east of the Dnieper River. So the Dnieper River running down here. If what is thought is likely to happen is that Russia will ultimately take these oblasts to the east, then having this nuclear power plant in here still operational makes it easy for them to power this area around here and to help with the rebuilding process that will no doubt go on at that stage. Other interesting stuff I've been reading about in European newspapers. Now, I don't live in Europe. I live in the Southern Hemisphere. But I just wonder why this narrative is being pushed. And the narrative is that Russia wants to invade all of Europe. Bild, German newspaper, is reporting that European intelligence sources could see Russia exploit weakness in the US from November the 24th to January 24th in the transition period in the next winter in the Northern Hemisphere. The German think tank DGAP suggests an attack within 6 to 10 years. However, the Polish National Security Agency have said no, they think it's less than that, within 36 months, within 3 years, and that if we want to avoid war, NATO countries on the eastern flank should adopt a shorter 3-year time period to prepare for confrontation. This is Jacek Siwiera, who heads the National Security Bureau in Poland. Well, the reason I wonder why this is being pushed is because there's no actual indication from Putin or Russia that they want to move beyond Ukraine. There's no indication that they want to even take Ukraine beyond the eastern oblasts. And had this fighting stopped last year, in last February, when there was negotiations with Zelensky, which Boris Johnson scuttled, the ex-British Prime Minister, it's entirely likely that even more of Ukraine would have remained of Ukraine. The way things are going now, I imagine that Mykolaiv, so this area here, Mykolaiv down here, and Odessa, these areas here will become Russia. Like Russia will extend past the Dnieper to take Mykolaiv and Odessa. Now, a few months ago, I don't think that would have happened. I think that they would have just stopped here at Kherson, taking everything on the eastern side of the Dnieper. But anyhow, now I think it's fairly certain that Russia will continue to take Mykolaiv and Odessa and deprive what remains of Ukraine of any port access. But still, there's no indication that Russia wished to take Ukraine in its entirety. I've said this a number of times, and John Mearsheimer has mentioned this, and I follow his logic on this very easily. And trying to take all of these western oblasts of Ukraine is going to be like trying to swallow a porcupine for Russia. The people in the west of Ukraine are Ukrainian, and they do not want to be Russian. People in the east of Ukraine are tending to be ethnically Russian, and a lot of them are very happy to be part of Russia. So going to the Dnieper makes sense. Now, Dmitry Medvedev did a week ago say, he mentioned some cities that are Russian cities. He said Zaporozhye, and Dnipro, Kharkiv, and Kyiv. So this is very inflammatory, him saying that Kyiv is a Russian city, because that does indicate that the Russians will go all the way to here and will look to even take Kyiv and control it. Anyhow, I don't see any reason or any evidence, and I'm sure there'll be some people on the channel who will commentate and just say I'm a Russian orc supporter or whatever, but I would love to see the evidence if you think that Russia is actually planning to move westwards through Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, and to take Germany ultimately, because there's just no evidence for it that I can see. I have heard reports that Moscow is preparing for a war with NATO, but they're preparing for NATO to push towards them, to come through Ukraine and to continue that fight, and for it to possibly be all of NATO. They're worried that that may happen, and they're preparing for that, but no indication that they have the resources or they have the desire to attempt to take Western Europe. It's just not there that I can see. But anyhow, it's being pushed in European media. Some think tanks saying, yeah, it could be 6 to 10 years. Others saying, oh, no, it'll be much shorter than that, 36 months. And then other ones saying, well, hang on, it could be this year. Once, if Biden loses the election and Trump's coming in, that 3-month period in between, that could be a very volatile time. And maybe that's when Russia will make its move to take Europe. It just doesn't make sense to me that Russia would try to do that, and they don't have the resources for it, and they just realise that they're not going to do it. I'd like to be proved wrong on it. Well, I wouldn't like to be proved wrong on it, but I'd be amazed if that's what happens. Anyhow, Still, we do see, though, that Germany is, taking these things seriously, or is gearing up. Germany is moving by 2027. They're sending a German brigade to be permanently stationed in Lithuania. So this is Germany over here, and this is Lithuania here. There's going to be a permanently stationed brigade on the most eastern flank of NATO, somewhere over here in Lithuania. Germans sending their troops closer to Belarus. Oil is interesting too. What's happening with oil? Now, there are sanctions on Russian oil, which we've known about for a long time, and a $60 price cap. So if you were buying Russian oil at more than $60 a barrel, then you can fall under sanctions that have been put in place by the West. If in transferring oil that has been purchased at over $60 a barrel, you use any nations that have agreed to the price cap coalition, then you can come under sanctioning there. And so there is apparently 6 ships with about 5 million barrels of oil, which are just idling off the coast of India. And they haven't made it to their destination. They're just sitting there. There's also reportedly a transfer vessel, which may be the Anshan 11 or the Anshan 2, which is a transfer vessel. And now it's a vessel which is capable of sucking oil out of one tanker, holding it, and then delivering it to port, or pumping it into another tanker and then sitting there and repeating that process. So shipping companies and ships can be sanctioned. And so a ship which is sanctioned means that it cannot then enter a port and operate in a port which has agreed to the sanctions. So a country which has agreed to the price cap coalition sanctions can't be unloaded. So what appears to be happening here is the way to circumvent that is that you have one of these transfer vessels sitting offshore. Your sanctioned ship, which isn't allowed to port, instead of going to port, comes to the transfer ship, offloads its fuel into the transfer ship and then heads home. And then another ship, which hasn't been sanctioned, comes in, receives that fuel and is able to port and offload that fuel. That at least seems to be what is happening here, so that if a sanctioned ship is prohibited from unloading, you're able to transfer its oil off to another vehicle, and then that vehicle can transfer it to another non-sanctioned ship, which allows it to be unloaded. So the sanctions in place, but there seem to be ways to get around them at this stage. Speaking of sanctions, the Houthis are being sanctioned in Turkey and in Yemen. So the head of the Currency Exchanges Association in Sana'a and 3 exchange houses in Yemen and Turkey have been sanctioned this week. Saeed al-Jama, which has allegedly directed and controlled tens of millions of dollars to the Houthis via these exchange houses. So this is an indication here that Turkey is providing some level of... Turkey is here. Oh, sorry, I'm not on the map. Turkey here. Providing some level of financial support, allowing money to be routed through to Yemen. So down here, so the Houthis are getting some of their money that way. And so there's been sanctions placed upon that exchange and other exchanges in Yemen. Now, there's also in the area of Israel and news there, some news that's come out today. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, he is talking about the proposed plan for Gaza control post this conflict. It's interesting when I read it. It's interesting that the Israeli defense minister says this is the plan for how the governance and control of Gaza will be post the conflict. He says that Palestinians will have civilian control, but Israel will have full military control over the settlement. So no no Palestinian military in there, no Hamas in the civilian control, no Israeli forces positioned in the area, but full military control. So the management and control of any goods going in or out of Gaza, any people traveling in or out of Gaza, will be at the discretion of the IDF, of the Israel Defense Forces, the Israeli military forces. So this will cover things like the inspection of all goods going in and out and the approval of people traveling in and out. It's just interesting that Israel say this is how this area will be governed, instead of the Palestinians in that area determining how they will be governed. In this area, US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken is going to be making a quick trip through the region. He will visit Israel, the West Bank, Turkey, Greece, Jordan, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt. The Matthew Miller, who is the State Department spokesperson, has said that Anthony Blinken will discuss specific steps parties can take, including how they can use their influence with others in the region to avoid escalation. So this is coming after the suspected Israeli killing of top Hamas official Saleh al-Aruri in Beirut on Tuesday. He was a former leader of the Qassam brigades and a member of the political bureau of Hamas, who coordinated the group's military and political activities outside of the Gaza Strip. So he was out there gathering financial and political support for Hamas. Also, in the strike that killed al-Aruri, high-ranking military commanders of Hamas, Sami Effendi and Azam al-Aqra, were killed. Now, this information is coming out now that what may have struck them was a Israeli Hermes drone and Nimrod missile. There's a history with Israel making strikes into Beirut to assassinate people. 50 years ago, in April of 1973, an Israeli commando team landed on a Beirut beach and killed 3 top Palestinian leaders. Now, reportedly, that team included their future Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak. And so the main target was the Palestinian Liberation Organization military leader Kamal Adwan. So there's history with Israel doing that, and there's some talk that it may have been Israeli system involved, a drone, because there was talk that it was a drone. There are questions being asked about Benjamin Netanyahu, Israeli Prime Minister's intentions here around the conflict and why he might be okay with the strike of a Hamas official in Beirut, knowing that that would be inflammatory. And some of the talk, and this talk is coming from his political opponents in Israel, is that this conflict is popular with Israelis, and that while the conflict is ongoing, he's able to retain power and stave off criticism of Israeli failures intelligence failures prior to the October 7 Hamas attacks, and failures during the conflict. For example, the large numbers of friendly fire, where something like over 30 of 170 reported killed Israeli soldiers have been due to friendly fire causes and killing of Israeli prisoners taken by Hamas due to Israeli bombing, and the shooting of Israeli prisoners when they're trying to escape from Hamas, shooting by Israelis. So all of these things, he can kind of keep that in the background. If he retains power, he perhaps has more ability at this stage to address his own corruption charges, which are still ongoing. Likely that if the war were to end, that he would then lose his position of prime minister, losing some strength and coverage, and perhaps suffer more in those. So there is some talk coming that he may have approved this attack in Beirut so as to inflame the situation, perhaps engage Beirut, make Hezbollah retaliate, and that then draw the US in. And so that the US get more involved and Israel is able to continue this fight for a longer period of time. Now, I'm not there. I'm not talking to Benjamin Netanyahu. I don't know if this is the intention, but Israeli reporters have mentioned that this kind of aligns with his modus operandi and the way that he's operated in the past. And they'd not be surprised if this was part of his intent here to prolong this conflict. Also, if the conflict were to end right now, strategically, it would look and be played up in a large part of the world as a failure for Israel, because the original stated goal was to destroy Hamas, and they would not stop until they destroyed all of Hamas. Even John Kirby, military spokesperson for the US, has come out and said, look, getting rid of some high-profile figures would be fine, and we're never going to destroy Hamas. We realize it's an idea and it's not going to happen. So already those things are being backtracked. It's not been a fast, successful strike for Israel. What is of note, though, that while that may be the case, that Israel is looking to provoke Hezbollah, Hezbollah's leader, Hassan Nasrallah, in his recent speech, has again given a moderate address, has not called for Hezbollah to embark in a full conflict with Israel. He is reportedly currently in a meeting with Iranian leaders, like they've travelled there to talk to him now. No doubt that we'll be talking about what the response is to be, because there will be some response, but what it will be, how it will be done, how measured it will be, is something that he will be discussing with Iranian leaders. It seems that Iran, both Iran and Hezbollah, are trying not to instigate the conflict at this time. They are, Iran is still, of course, its proxies are still operating in Iraq and Syria. The Yemenis are operating and still throttling transport through the Red Sea. But Iran itself is not engaging in this, and Hezbollah has been engaging on the northern border, but it's been in a restricted sort of it hasn't been in a full-throated attack at Israel. So now there is reports that ISIS has taken responsibility for the attack, which killed Saleh al-Aruri in Beirut. However, there are some questions around that. So, and I'm not an expert on this, but this is what some of the questions that are being asked about that. So the claim by ISIS that they've taken responsibility for the attack, some of the questions being asked is that they directly mention Iran. Now, reportedly, they often don't do that, and instead they would speak of Fars province or Khorasan province, provinces in Iran, is how they would refer to Iran rather than calling it Iran. The two reported suicide bombers, their faces were covered and blurred in the photograph that was released of them after their death. Again, this is reportedly different to normal. As normal, those suicide bombers are considered martyrs. They are dead. There's no need to hide their identity, and they generally don't hide their identity. The other thing is that the ISIS claim for responsibility came 30 hours after the attack. And this again is reportedly unusual in that normally if they have committed an attack, they will claim responsibility for it straight away so that people know and feel like it's them. They're the first guys to put their hand up and say that they did it. Also, just as I was putting this show together, on some Telegram channels, there are now pictures coming out claiming that US GBU-39B precision-guided glide bombs may have been what was involved in the strike. There was what appeared to be a photograph of the roof of a building showing where there may have been entry points of these glide bombs. And if this is the case, this would indicate that the strike had come from a plane and not a drone. Now, if it's come from a plane in this area, then again, that rules out ISIS as having done this. ISIS is just not going to have access to planes, certainly not planes with US GBU-39B precision-guided glide bombs. I don't know if this has been used, but this is the most latest recent information I've seen. So if it has been used, indicating that it is Israeli US who are behind this attack. Perhaps Israel directly, but indirectly the US through the provision of weapons. And this is what the US is copping flack for now, is that while they might not be boots on the ground directly engaged in the bombing of civilians in the Gaza Strip, they are providing the weapons to the Israelis who are doing that. And so they are indirectly implicated in the death of those civilians. Last thing I think here for today, Taiwan is having its elections in just a week's time on the 13th of January. Now, the party looking for independence, the Democratic Progressive Party, which is led by Lai Ching-te, in polling going in, which is from about 2 days ago, from the 3rd of January. He's averaging around 39% of the vote. He's sitting in front of Hao Yu-yi on 31%, who is the leader of the KMT party. And they are both in ahead of Ko Wen-ji of the Taiwan People's Party, who's getting about 24%. So the leader of the KMT, Hao Yu-yi, he is the candidate here who is most likely to take a China-friendly approach if his party were to get in. Lai Ching-te of the DPP is the most Western-friendly there. The KMT are more inclined to work with China to reduce tensions, and they could adopt like a Hong Kong model where Taiwan is considered to be a part of China, which is what China overall wants, and which is where you get the one China policy from. But it is given a great deal of autonomy to effectively govern itself. So it's not directly governed by China, but it is considered with no question globally that Taiwan is a part of China. The DPP, who are leading, Lai Ching-te at 39% of the polling. Now, in that polling, there's quite a bit of overlap. You know, he had a spread, but 39 was about the middle. Whereas Hao Yu-yi of the KMT party, he's on 31, but there was quite a bit of spread there. So the Taiwan won't release any poll information for 10 days leading up. So that's the last poll we'll get before the election. So at this stage, Western-friendly DPP leader appears to be in front, but relatively closely behind is KMT party. So while DPP strongly want independence, Western ideal, the KMT more likely to be more moderate and to perhaps ultimately even move towards an agreement where they interpretate the China policy as being, yes, we are Chinese, but we have autonomous control of our island, which is what China would like to see here. And if that were to be the case, that will be will be interesting to see what that means in terms of the whole US-China growing conflict over Taiwan. If Taiwan elects a government and that government then decides to join China and be considered part of China and give up aspirations for being a separate country, then I wonder what the US will do, because the US is now put in a position where this fight they're pushing to get right on the doorstep of China with a little democratic foothold, which is US Western friendly, that game plan might be all over. If that becomes considered China, by Taiwan considers itself China, then Chinese military bases will be there very rapidly. There will be no US weapons going into Taiwan anymore. It will be a complete turnaround. So the US will then need to reconsider its position in how it tries to influence that area of Asia without having any control in Taiwan. Okay, I might leave it there for today. Hey, if you've watched the show and you're enjoying the channel, please subscribe if you haven't already. I hope you're having a good day, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.